Yes, I admit I did it, but how much better are you than me, really? Acting like you're the model of loyalty. Didn't you ditch the boss too when you got a wife? Didn't your wife and son suddenly become more important? Everyone does things for themselves. Everyone makes themselves top priority. Aren't you embarrassed to keep hanging that ancient shitty deed over my head? When he heard wife and son, Nangfeng's outrage exploded. Although neither of them could move, they were so intent on their argument that they didn't realize the way they had addressed each other had slipped. They had dropped your general and my general in favor of you and me. In their fury, they had completely failed to notice what this exposed. Only now did they realize their error. Shilian had long since stopped talking. Nanfeng and Fuyao both whipped their heads over to look in Shilian's direction and saw that he had silently flipped on the silk bed, turning over and only showing them his back. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. Shilian faced the stone wall as he politely asked, "Are you two going to keep this up? I won't comment on anything else you were discussing, but, I do think that someone's wife and son should be more important. There's nothing wrong with that. It's basic human sentiment. But all this ancient history, let's not stew in it. Let's think of a way to escape." "You already knew?" Fuyao cut. You already knew? Fuyao cut off. I can't. Damn it. Chapter 93. Cave of 10,000 Gods. Faces of 10,000 Gods revealed. Seeing that he was taking the matter quite hard, Shilian decided to try and give some guidance. "Actually, it's not that big of a deal." Mooching sneered. "I knew I was right. Was it fun? Did you enjoy watching me act? Now that they were being honest with each other, Mooching was honestly tearing him a new one. Nanfeng, or Fangsheng rather, only looked awkward at first, but in the end he couldn't let Mooching's words slide without comment. What's with that tone? Mooching was pale-faced and thin-skinned, and his entire head turned bright red whenever his blood started rushing, making it impossible to hide that he was upset. He whipped his head around. "What tone? Don't forget that you're the one that gestures here too. I'm not as generous as you are to have no complaints about being someone's entertainment for so long. I wasn't trying to watch you guys make fools of yourselves," Shilian said. "And stop thinking everyone is as narrow-minded as you are," Fangshan added. His Highness still tried to help you even when your shitty deeds landed you in heaven's prison. Ha. Ha. Oh, you think so much, but I end up in prison thanks to your son. What you want to fight? What, you want to fight for real? You're not afraid to sire a son, but you are afraid to talk? Fangshan really wanted to knock him dead for raising the subject of his son. Unfortunately, all three of them were still rolled up tight by the silk webbing, so he wouldn't move a muscle. Fangshan and Mooching could only curse at each other, all manners and class gone. Fangshan's face was getting redder and redder from anger, and Shilian was afraid he'd blow his top soon and start cursing up a storm. So Shilian tried to wiggle a bit, managing to rock back and forth a few times and eventually roll to Mooching's side. Mooching, can you try turning around?" Mooching stopped yelling and took a breath. "What do you want?" "Fangshan is too far away. He can't roll over there, but since we know these webs can be torn by teeth, I want to try and break the bindings on your wrists," Shilian explained. Mooching glared at him for a moment, then his expression swiftly cooled as he gazed upward, like a dead fish looking at the sky. No thanks. I really do want to help, Shilian said helplessly. Your Highness possesses a body of 1,000 gold. I can't possibly trouble such greatness, Mooching said coldly. Fengshen cussed. What the actual fuck? Why are you being so sarcastic at a time like this? Huh? He's helping you, trying to save you, but you're acting like he owes you. Mooching's head shot up. Who asked him to help? Who asked him to help? Mooching's head shot up. Who asked him to help? Shilian, why do you always show up at the times like these? Shilian was a little bewildered, and he vaguely remembered that Mooching had asked him the same thing a long time ago. How did he answer him back then? He couldn't remember. Is there something wrong with showing up at times like these? Mooching lay back down. Doesn't matter. I don't need your help. Why? Shilian questioned. Everyone needs help sometimes, just to get by. Don't bother with him anymore, Fengshen said. He's just a show-off. He thinks he'll lose face if he gets help from you. Mooching and Fengshen kept at each other's throats while the wrath butterfly leisurely danced around Shilian. It was unhurried and calm as it shimmered with faint silver light. It made Shilian remember something, so he interrupted their snipping. Stop arguing, you two. It'll be more of a joke if someone else sees you like this, and someone will be along to help us soon. No one in heaven or earth will heed a call from this hellish place, so who's gonna come save us? Mooching said derisively. Unless a particular person came to mind before he finished, and he trailed off abruptly. Fengshen, however, said directly, Crimson Rainsop Flower came with you? You trust him that much? Mooching said doubtfully. You sure he's gonna come? Shilian was confident. He will come. Huacheng had been behaving oddly for a while. Several times he had almost suspected that the Huacheng next to him was fake. Nonetheless, his instincts told him that it was impossible. Even if he wanted to, how would he find us in this cave? Mooching added. Why don't we holler some more? Fengshen suggested. The more people, the louder the noise. No need, Shilian said. We only need to sit and wait. No, just lie down and wait, because Huacheng and I are already joined by a red string. Before he even finished the sentence, he could see Fengshen and Mooching's faces twitching like worms had crawled into their ears. What's with the look? Shilian asked. Don't misunderstand. I'm not talking about some frivolous notion about the red string of fate. It's a spiritual device. Just a spiritual device. Only then did they stop twitching. Oh, I see, Fengshen replied. Mooching was doubtful. What kind of spiritual device? What does it do? It's quite useful, Shilian said. It's a red string tied on both of our hands that individually connects the two of us, and one can use it to find the other. It will never break as long as one of us is still breathing. The others couldn't listen anymore and cut him off. How is that any different than a string of fate? It's exactly the same thing. Shilian was taken aback. No, I don't think so. It's different. And just how is it different? It's exactly the same thing. All right? It's exactly the same thing, all right? Mooching exclaimed. Shilian pondered the matter only to discover that it was true. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the intent and function of the spiritual device really was quite similar to the red string of fate. Just when he began to think he should drop the train of thought, a voice came from above. Guga, are you down there? The moment he heard the voice, Shilian instantly felt himself relax. He looked up. Sunlung, I'm down here. Then he turned to the other two in the pit. You see, I told you he'd come. Fengshen and Mooching both made complicated expressions when they saw how happy he looked. Huacheng didn't peek his head over the edge, but all of them could hear the helpless way he spoke. Guga, I said not to run off. Now what should we do? Shilian was confused by his tone, and his delight faltered. Huh? Is this silk webbing that difficult to deal with? Can Emming slash through it? The silk isn't the difficult part, he thought. He thought he heard Hua Cheng mutter faintly, but the words were so quiet he wasn't sure whether they were actually said. A moment later, Hua Cheng spoke. Emming is not in a good state right now. Shilian found this strange. Wasn't Emming perfectly fine and completely energetic just a little while ago? How could there be something wrong with it now? Next to him, Mooching humphed. No need to ask him anyway. How could the scimitar Emming be in a bad state? He's clearly looking for excuse not to help. Don't say that, Shilian countered. Shilian thought it was more likely that Emming was being disciplined and Hua Cheng wasn't allowing it out. Suddenly, a black shadow flashed above, and a figure dressed in red landed suddenly at Shilian's side. Hua Cheng leaned down to hold Shilian's hand. Sunlung, why did you jump down here too? Sunlung, why did you jump down here too? Shilian cried when he realized who it was. Watch out for the spider silk. Sure enough, the white silk tendrils were flying at him in attack, but Hua Cheng didn't even spare them a glance. He gave a casual wave. Hundreds of silver butterflies shielded his back. Forming armor with their wings, they started ruthlessly fighting the silk tendrils. Hua Cheng tore away the white silk that bounded Shilian, then held him around the waist and shook the red umbrella with his free hand. Let's go. The other two were dumbfounded when they saw that he had zero intentions of saving them. Did you forget something? Shilian hadn't yet spoken, but Hua Cheng looked back. Oh, that's right. The heavily bound Fangshan flew straight into Hua Cheng's hand, and he passed the sword to Shilian. Guga, your sword. That was what he forgot? Fangshan and Mooching both cried, Hey! Hua Cheng hugged Shilian closer and flung out his arm to open the red umbrella. Guga, hold on tight to me. With that, the umbrella started flying upward, taking the pair along with it. Shilian hugged him tightly as instructed, and the other two began to scream again in earnest when they were about 6 meters off the ground. Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I haven't forgotten you. He sent Royer from his wrist, which wrapped itself around the two giant cocoons a few times and began to drag them along behind the umbrella. When they were halfway out of the pit, Fangshan cried, Wait, I left something behind. What is it? Shilian called from above. A sword, Fangshan shouted. It fell into the corner. Shilian looked down. Sure enough, a sword hilt was barely visible in all the white silk. He made Royer stretch out further to wrap the sword. He pulled them all out together. Finally, all four made it back onto solid ground. Royer threw the two thick cocoons on the ground and hurriedly wrapped itself back onto Shilian's wrist, trembling slightly. It almost seemed like it was terrified of the white silk webs, which were so much like itself, but aggressive and evil. Shilian soothed Royer while cutting the web on the cocoons with Fangshan. The moment Fangshan and Mooching could move, they both leapt to their feet and ripped off the rest of the webbing. Shilian held out the sword. Held out the sword Roya had helped bring along toward Fangshan, finally getting a good look at the blade. He stared at it in amazement. This is Hongjin? Nanfeng, did your general repair that sword? It was an offhand comment, but the moment the words left his lips, he realized how bad it sounded. Fangshan and Mooching were still in the forms of Nanfeng and Fuyao, and Shilian had forgotten that their identities had been exposed and was still subconsciously going along with their act. Although he intended to be considerate, the consideration simply led to awkwardness. The two of them fell into a strange Silence. Fengshen couldn't mask his expression. Discomfort surfaced on his face. He transformed back to his true form and took the sword. Yes, it's fixed. There are plenty of ghosts on Mount Tonglu, after all. Flashing it around makes things easier. Shilian took a peek at the one who shattered Hongjin, who was standing right beside him. He cleared his throat softly. Sorry for the trouble. After all, it wasn't easy to repair a sword that had been shattered to pieces. Muqing also transformed back into his true form and brushed off the rest of the silk webbing on his sleeves. It's good that it's fixed. So many of the nefarious creatures here are adept to disguise. If someone's not good at using their brain, using Hongjin is the only way that they can see through the deception. Fengshen was pissed. Who are you calling brainless so passive-aggressively? Do you think I wouldn't notice? And there they went again. Shilian shook his head and turned to Huacheng. Sunlong, I ran off too quickly before. Sorry for leaving you behind. Huacheng tucked the umbrella away. Don't worry, as long as Guga doesn't run off like that again. Shilian grinned, but as he was about to speak, he saw that Muqing's glance at Huacheng had turned into a strange, pointed stare. Muqing, what is it? Shilian asked. Muqing immediately snapped out of it and gave him a look. Nothing. I've never seen Crimson Rainsaw flower like this and found it curious, that's all. Shilian couldn't fully believe his explanation. While this likely was the first time Muqing had seen Huacheng's true form, he'd certainly seen Huacheng in his youthful body, and the two skins weren't remarkably different, so why that look? The four left the cave, but after only a few steps, Fengshen asked in astonishment, What is this place? Muqing was also stunned. What happened here? They had been trapped at the bottom of the silk webbing pit, so they hadn't had a chance to investigate the situation outside. They were astonished at the sight of the innumerable unique divine statues filling the cave statues filling cave after cave, and shocked to learn that there was such a mysterious place and such uncanny craftsmanship beneath this great snowy mountain. This is a cave of 10,000 gods, Shilian explained. Muqing scanned their surroundings and mumbled, Who knows how many years and how much blood and sweat it'd take to build something like this. This is honestly, he seemed at a loss for words to describe it. Shilian could understand his feelings after all. A stone cave like this was meant for cultivation and worship of divine. His parents had constructed caves like this for him. What heavenly official wouldn't be astonished by such a massive cave of 10,000 gods? If one of their own statues was worshipped in a place like this, it would be a huge boon to their divinity. What god is worshipped in this cave? Fengshen asked, confused. Why are all the faces covered? Naturally, it's to prevent future passerby like us from seeing, Shilian replied. No, that's strange, Muqing said. They could have just smashed the statues' heads. Why go through all this trouble? Thin veils like these won't stop anyone who really wants to see. As he spoke, he walked over, intending to peel away the veil the nearest divine statue. Shilian hadn't had the chance to stop him when there was a chilling flash. The tip of a silver blade loomed mere centimeters away from Muqing's fingers. Murderous intent made the air between them grow tense. What are you doing? Fengshen asked in alarm. Even with the blade so close, Muqing didn't seem scared at all. Your scimitar looks just fine. Why'd you tell us that it's not in a good state? Huacheng stood directly behind him and said lazily, Didn't anyone teach you not to randomly put your hands on things in other people's territory? It's not your territory, so whose justice are you upholding? Muqing countered. I just don't want to cause unnecessary trouble, Huacheng said flatly. This is Mount Tunglu, after all. Who knows what could happen if the veils are removed? I can't believe there's come a day when someone as arrogant as Crimson Rainsalt Flower would be afraid to cause unnecessary trouble, Mooching said. He moved his hand downward to touch the statue's carved robe. The scimitar Imming followed and pointed at him once more. I'm only trying to touch the stone now, not remove the veil. Why is Crimson Rainsalt Flower stopping me again? Mooching questioned. Hua Cheng shot him a fake-looking smile. I'm preventing you from causing problems. Shilian put himself between the two. Stop. It's not like we have to see which god is being worshipped here. We shouldn't stay here too long anyway. Let's just go. Don't forget that we all still have a mission to complete. Hua Cheng stared at Mooching's hand. Since that's what Guga wants, have him put his hand away and I'll let go. Mooching, back off, all right? Shilian said. Mooching glared at him. Are you nuts? Why shouldn't he back off first? What if I back off and he doesn't? Between a heavenly official and a ghost, Fangxing naturally chose to stand on the side of the heavenly official. At most, we'll accept both sides standing down at the same time. Hua Cheng showed no signs of doing so. You wish. Seeing that neither side would give in, Shilian rested a hand on Mooching's arm. Mooching, drop it, he urged gently. You're the one who started this, so you should be the one to let it go, all right? Can you think of it as giving me some face? I swear that if you get back off, someone will keep his promise. Although Mooching was clearly reluctant, he held the stalemate for another moment, then slowly dropped his hand. They all returned to the road. Finally, the tension relaxed, and Shilian sighed in relief. They reached another fork in the road, and Shilian turned to Hua Cheng. Which way do you think we should go this time? Hua Cheng picked a path, seemingly at random. This way. Fangxin and Mooching had been walking behind them and appeared to be at each other's throats again, but Mooching briefly paused an argument. How did you decide? He asked. Why this way? The two in front turned their heads to look at him. It was random. Fangxin frowned. How can you pick randomly? Let's not go blindly. We might tumble into another pit. Hua Cheng smiled. Even if we fall into a pit, I have ways to pull His Highness out. You can follow us if you'd like, or you can head off on your own, if you prefer. To be honest, I'd rather not have to rescue you again. You... That was just the way Hua Cheng spoke. Even if he had a smile on his face and his words were perfectly polite, it always sounded fake. The faker his smile, the more his tone enraged people, so much that Fangxing knocked an arrow on his bow. Shilian knew that he wouldn't actually shoot. Sorry about Fangxin, but considering our current situation, it really makes no difference which way we go. Hua Cheng laughed heartily. Oh, I'm scared. Looks like I'd better stay far away from you. He waggled his brows at Shilian and really did put some distance between them. Shilian knew that he was just trying to leave the other two behind, and he smiled as he shook his head. He was about to follow Hua Cheng, but without warning, Mooching reached out and pulled him to stop. Shilian looked back, bewildered. Mooching? What is it? Mooching didn't answer. Instead, he simply shouted, Now! Then he grabbed Shilian and dashed off down the other path. Ahead, Hua Cheng had noticed that something was wrong. He turned back to look, but Fangxin had already punched the stone wall, boulders rumbling and crashing down, blocking the road behind them. Mooching and Fangxin rushed forward and slapped 50 or so talisman on the rocks in the span of a second. Hua Cheng was now separated from the three of them by a pile of boulders. As it turned out, Fangxin and Mooching hadn't been arguing when they were trailing behind them earlier. They'd actually been discussing a way to launch a sudden attack. Shilian was dumbfounded. What are you guys doing? He struggled free from Mooching's grip, wanting to check on Hua Cheng behind the wall of stone. However, Fangxin trapped him, and he and Mooching each grabbed one side of Shilian's arms and began to drag him off. began to drag him off at a breakneck pace. "Let's get away, quick. Those talismans won't last for long," Fangshan exclaimed. You have to ask what we're doing. There's something odd about him. Can't you tell?" Mooching reprimanded. "How is he odd?" Shilian questioned. "You've really gone stupid. Odd is written all over him. You're the only one who's blind to it," Mooching exclaimed. "Stop talking and run," Fangshan roared. "Fuck, I think the wrath butterflies caught up. Block the cave entrance," Mooching barked. Fangshan continued to punch the walls as they ran. Many of the cave entrances were completely blocked by the giant rocks that tumbled down. The two dragged Shilian as they fled through those endless winding underground corridors, sending his head spinning from all the twists and turns. "Stop! Stop!" Shilian shouted as they ran. When they felt that they had gone far enough, Fangshan and Mooching paused to catch their breaths. Taking advantage of this break, Shilian said, "What I meant was, why did you two suddenly drag me away? Did you notice something?" Fangshan was supporting himself with his hands on his knees and panting harshly. "Let him tell you again." Mooching straightened up and turned to Shilian. "It's so obvious. You didn't see it? The pearl. Do you remember that pearl?" "What pearl?" Shilian asked. Mooching said each word slowly and clearly. "The red coral pearl from the earrings of the god-pleasing martial warrior costume. The one you wore for the Shangyuan heavenly ceremony. The earrings you lost." Shilian thought for a long while, but he still couldn't remember. He looked confused as he tugged at his earlobes. Were those earrings red coral pearls? Did I lose one? The corners of Mooching's lips twitched as he said furiously, You two even wrongfully accused me of stealing that pearl. How could you forget something like this?" "It's been 800 years, Shilian began, but Fangshan interrupted to rebuke Mooching. "Stop making shit up. No one wronged you. You're the one who started making assumptions all on your own." Shilian waved. Stop fighting. "Why are you talking about a pearl out of nowhere?" "Because it's been found," Mooching exclaimed. "Did you see that red band tied in Hua Chang's hair?" Shilian's eyes widened. "Are you saying—" "I am," Mooching stated with conviction. So that was why Mooching had a weird look in his eyes when he looked at Hua Chang earlier. "Why would he have the red coral pearl?" "Are you sure you remember it correctly?" Shilian questioned. Mooching cut him off. "I've searched for that pearl nonstop for a whole year. I searched for that pearl nonstop for a whole year, and I never stopped looking for it. I'm the only one who would never remember it wrong." Shilian crossed his arms and tucked them into his sleeves. He frowned his brows in contemplation. "I still think you might be mistaken. There's no reason for him to have that pearl. Don't all high-quality red coral pearls look pretty much the same? Besides, Sunlung always liked collecting rare treasures. He's got antiques that are thousands of years old." Mooching nodded. "Fine, very well. You think I'm wrong? Fine. Then look at this." He was standing right next to the divine statue as he finished speaking. He yanked the veil off its face. "Why don't you take a look at this, then? Surely it can't be mistaken, too." The moment the veil was lifted, Shilian's pupils shrank. The divine statue's face wasn't deformed or frightening. It was the face of a young man who wore a gentle, kind expression, smiling in high spirits. But when Shilian saw it, a chill raced down his spine, and he raised the hair on his neck. How could it not be eerie? This face was nearly identical to Shilian's own. Looking at the divine statue so closely, like it was staring into a mirror, even the smile previously kind now seemed disturbing. Shilian couldn't help but feel shaken by the sight of it. "This... Are you still going to tell me I'm wrong?" Mooching said coldly. With much effort, Shilian finally squeezed out, "Why would one of my divine statues be here?" "One," Mooching replied. "Not just one. Look closely." He then yanked the veil from another statue. It too had a face that was undoubtedly Shilian's. He pulled the veils from faces of 5 or 6 more divine statues that were all identical. This certainly is a cave of 10,000 gods, Muching said, but there's only one god worshipped here. Only Shilian. He was surrounded by endless copies of his own face. It was like Shilian had fallen into a bizarre, hallucinatory dream. His mind spun for a good while before he abruptly realized something. Wait, Muching, you didn't get a chance to see these statues' faces earlier, right? You were going to remove the veils, but he stopped you. Muching humped. I didn't need to see the statues' faces to know that that you're the subject. How would you know? Shilian asked. Muching rolled the silk veils into a ball and tossed them to the side, his veins popping slightly. How would I know? Because all your clothes, accessories, and daily living needs were my responsibility back then. I washed for you, I mended for you, and every item in your wardrobe was unique. These statues are too detailed. Everything is there exactly the same, completely. When I saw those clothes, of course I knew whose face they would have. Shilian fell silent. He put a hand over his forehead and thoughts back on Shilian fell silent. He put a hand over his forehead and thought back on Hua Cheng's odd behavior along the way. Next to him, Feng Xin said, he wouldn't let us look at those statues, which proves he knows exactly what's weird about them. The whole excuse about how we all dropped by accident after the avalanche was bullshit. He must know about what this place is. Not just that, I bet he was the one who threw us into the pit of silk webbing, Muching added. He was serious about killing us. But why are these statues like this? Shilian wondered. These statues had all been covered with such precision that they seemed nearly alive. The details were more than detailed, almost to the point of being frightening. It was clear to see just how closely the sculptor had observed their subject. Shilian didn't even think the work of Shinla's most renowned sculptors had reached this level of detail. It was as if the sculptor's mind was filled by Shilian and Shilian alone, as if his eyes saw nothing else. 3 of them were surrounded by countless statues that all bore the same face. Feng Shen shuddered violently. Honestly, what the fuck? Too creepy. They're all too fucking realistic. And there's so many. I suspect these statues are components from some wicked spell. Let's destroy them, Muching said. He moved to shutter one with a chop of his hand. Shilian's mind instantly pulled back to the present. He stopped him. Don't! He cried. Muching looked at him. Are you sure? The spell could be aimed at you. Shilian pondered on it, but in the end he still said, let's not act recklessly. I think the chances that it's a wicked spell is very small. I think it's very large, Feng Xin said. Honestly, what the fuck? Doesn't the sight of these things scare you? Muching stared at Shilian, who stared at him right back. And where are you basing that off of? Nothing, Shilian said. But these divine statues are quite nice and very meticulously sculpted. If we destroy them before we find out about them, we might regret it. After a pause, he added, Sun Lung might have lied to me about something, but I truly don't think it's anything that would harm me. Muching couldn't believe his ears. Did he cast a spell on you to bewitch your mind? I think if he wrote suspicious on his face, you'd suddenly forget how to read. While they were talking, Feng Shen snapped to alertness, like he was about to face a dangerous foe. Watch out, he cried. Shilian and Muching both tensed and demanded, What is it? The silk spider is coming at us again, Feng Shen exclaimed. The palm torch illuminated the stone walls ahead. They were covered with large patches of dense white silk. These three cursed mentally, gearing themselves up for another clash. Yet, unexpectedly, the white silk wasn't as aggressive as the silk in the pit. It neither moved nor attacked. It was acting like a gecko lounging on a wall. After they had watched it for a while, Shilian observed, these silk nets don't seem alive. If they're not alive, then what are they for? Fengshen questioned. Shilian had an answer in mind, which he confirmed he went over to study it. Which he confirmed when he went over to study it. I think they're covering something. All three of them stood at the stone wall. Shilian gave the white silk a tug and pulled off a large section. As expected, the strands were tough and difficult to tear down, but he could manage it with effort. The veils had concealed the identity of those divine statues, so what was hidden behind these stone walls? The other two joined him, tearing down the webs, each taking care of different areas. Soon a section of the wall was revealed on Shilian's side. It's a mural. The webs had been hiding a giant painting. The entire surface of the wall was densely packed with lines, colors, and little people. The mural was divided into smaller pieces, each with different styles. Some were coarse and wild, some elegant and some exquisite, some particular. After studying it for a while, Shilian stated, he painted this. He? Muxing echoed. Huacheng, are you sure? Yes, Shilian said softly. There are words on here, and he's one who wrote them. He pointed at a little blood-red person in the wall. Right next to it, there was a bunch of messy, twisted, indiscernible characters. It looked like they had been written in a state of delirium, or scrawled to vent the author's feelings during a period of extreme suffering. Based on those characters, Shilian could guess that the little blood-red person painted here was Huacheng himself, but for some unknown reason, he had depicted himself as extremely ugly and disfigured. Fengshen glanced at it and couldn't help but comment, that handwriting, it's so ugly. I've gone blind. I bet I can even write better than him. Illustration. Handwriting uglier than Fengshen's was truly beyond saving. Shilian was dazzled. There was so much to see that he didn't even know where to start looking. Now that he confirmed this was Huacheng's work, it was like he had discovered a treasure trove. His fingertips began to tremble slightly. Muxing seemed to have discovered something nearby and called out, Your Highness, come quick. Come and see. Only then did Shilian snap out of it. What is it? Fengshen and Muxing were already rendered speechless and could only point at one of the images. This piece was considerably larger than the other ones depicted. Right in its center was a tall tower connected to a city wall. Below, a sea of people surrounded a magnificent stage. The lines were simple, yet they captured the scene perfectly with only a few strokes. Don't bite. Muxing pointed at the center of the mural. So, that was him? He said with a trembling voice. Shilian was also staring at that section. This piece was mostly colorless. Only two figures had been colored within it. There was a small figure at the bottom that had been painted pure white. It seemed to be glowing. The figure was looking up at the sky with hands outstretched. It was about to catch another little figure who was falling from the tower. That little figure was bloody red. Is that him? Was that him? Muxing murmured. The little kid who fell during the Shanyuan Heavenly ceremonial parade? But how is that possible? I can't believe it. Crimson Rain Flower was him? Fengshen patted Shilian and Muxing madly and pointed to one side. There's more in the back. Shilian walked over to the other mural and saw it depicted a dilapidated little shrine. Upon the shrine's altar there was a divine statue, which also glowed faintly with a white light. It held a sword in one hand, and in the other it offered a red umbrella downward. There was an ugly little blood-red figure at the bottom of the mural. It cupped a small flower in its hands, which it offered to the statue. Shilian felt a sudden headache coming on. His hand flew to clutch his throbbing temple, but he didn't look away. The next mural depicted a battlefield. Large bands of soldiers were gearing up for war, and a little white figure floated in the sky overhead. It wielded a long sword in one hand and looked mighty glorious. There was another little blood-red figure among the dense battalion below. Its head was raised to watch the one in the sky. Shiliana was absorbed in these paintings when Fengshin's disbelieving voice rang out. That red one, it's all the same person, isn't it? It's all him. They're all Ho-chung. Holy fuck, he's been following you all this time? Mooching also looked incredulous. He wasn't just following, he was watching very closely. Very, very closely. He was everywhere. Look at this. The main street, Buyu Forest. What's this? Daisy Hill? My god. He was the one who carved all these divine statues. Or was he the one who carved all these divine statues? Looking at the murals was giving Fengshin chills. My fucking god, who the hell is he? He had an eye on you since 800 years ago, and he's still following you, even now? What the fuck? This is terrifying. He's bewitched. Is he bewitched? What the hell what does he want? No normal devotee would go this far, so just what the hell does he want? There must be some plot. There must be, Mooching exclaimed. Let's keep looking. I'm sure we'll find a clue. Shilian was completely stricken. He stared at the little blood-red figure on the wall, unable to wrap his mind around it. It felt like countless memories were fighting to rush into his brain. He hadn't forgotten, but they'd never taken root. They were still pouring in fast, and his breath could barely keep up with anyone. Just then, Shilian heard the other two yell, and he snapped out of it. What is it now? He asked. Fengshin and Mooching were both standing before a stone wall, and it looked like they had seen something outrageous. When they saw Shilian walk towards them, Fengshin quickly turned around and stopped him, pushing him away. Holy fuck, don't look. What? Shilian was bewildered. What is it? Why can't I look? Mooching's expression was dark. Just don't bother. There's nothing worth seeing here. Let's just get out of here as soon as possible. The two of them grabbed each one of Shilian's arms and started to bolt once more. Shilian complained as he was being dragged along. What are you doing? I wasn't done looking at the murals. There's no need to look anymore. Things like that shouldn't be seen. Fengshin yelled angrily as he ran. My fucking god, I've never witnessed anything like that in my fucking life, nor anyone like him. Shilian was baffled. What have you never witnessed? What's wrong with Sunlung? Why are you still calling him Sunlung? Stop it, Mooching admonished. You can't get away from him fast enough. Never go near him again. He's not normal. He's sick in the head. He's crazy. Shilian couldn't listen anymore. Why are you two insulting him like this? None of us are all that normal, you know? Stop asking, Fengshin cried. You don't understand. He's not like us. He's crazy. Towards me what? Shilian demanded. Please let me go. Let me go back and see for myself, all right? One wanted to go back and the other two were pulling him forward. They were stuck in a stalemate until suddenly a bone-chilling voice came from ahead of them. Didn't I say not to randomly put your hands on things in other people's territory? The three of them froze, then suddenly turned to look. Before them stood a man dressed in red. Ho-chung was leaning against the stone wall, blocking their way with a smile. If you do, who knows what'll happen. While his mouth was smiling, his eyes held a trace of mirth, but was instead a dark and... His eyes held not a trace of mirth, but instead a dark and muddied... But was instead dark and muddied. He hugged one of his arms while his other hand idly fiddled with something small. It was a deep red coral pearl tied to his thin braid. The coral luminous red luster was bright and dazzling as the red affinity knot on his pale finger was as The coral luminous red luster was as bright and dazzling as the red affinity knot on his pale finger. Neither of the hundreds of charmed talisman nor the heavy piles of boulders had stopped him. Fengshen and Muqing both reacted swiftly. Fengshen shot a barrage of arrows as Muqing swung his saber to send the air blade strike towards Huacheng, then grabbed Shilian and ran. Fengshen employed his same old tricks and struck wildly at the rock walls. "What the fuck?" he cried. "How did he find us so fast?" "How should I know?" Muqing yelled back. "Wait, the red string, his fingers are still tied with that red string." When it dawned on them, they both turned around to seize Shilian's hand, as if he would let them. Shilian clutched the red knot on his fingers and protected it, and exclaimed, "You can't!" "Your Highness, he found us as long as you keep that red string... Your Highness, he'll find us as long as you keep that red string tied to you," Fengshen insisted. "If you don't want him to catch up, it has to be removed." Shilian still held on, guarding his fingers. "I'm not afraid of him catching up. I want to ask him about this face to face." Muqing's eyes widened. "You still want to talk to him? I don't think you realize how dangerous he is until he's devoured you whole." "But I already know he's dangerous," Shilian countered. You guys won't tell me what the mural shows, and you won't let me go near him. You won't convince me of anything acting like this. He's a ghost king, and his behavior is abnormal. People would usually stay far away based on that alone. You shouldn't need to be convinced of anything." Shilian raised two fingers. "Two choices. Either you let me go back and ask him to explain, or you let me go back to look at that mural." Fengshen and Muqing seemed to remember something terrifying. One lips began to twitch, while the other's brow could not furrow any deeper. They both stood blocking him and yelled in unison, "We'll allow neither." Thus Shilian rolled up his sleeves. "Well, since you both said no, let's solve this with our fists. Who's first? Or will you come at me together?" Muqing turned to Fengshen. "You first?" He then backed away to the side of the tunnel. Fengshen didn't seem confident in that he'd win the fight against Shilian, but he was determined to give it his best shot to rescue his wayward youth. He gripped his bow. "Very well, Your Highness. Pardon my insolence." Before Shilian could even return the opening courtesy, he felt something hot being stuck into his back. Someone behind him shouted, "Stay still! Don't talk!" And he was rendered stiff as an iron board, and not just his body. He also couldn't move his mouth to speak. Muqing darted out from behind Shilian. "Let's drag him away to the talisman Let's drag him away. That talisman will paralyze him temporarily, but it won't last long," he said to Fengshen. Fengshen was slightly dumbfounded. "Why did you ambush him? Why didn't we agree on why did you ambush him? Didn't we agree to go one-on-one?" Shilian was shocked as well that Muqing would immediately go back on his word. He wouldn't have been deceived so easily had it not been for his wholehearted trust in both of his once subordinates. "Who has the time for you to go one-on-one now?" Muqing said. "He's doing it on purpose. It's easy to see that he's dragging things out to give Huacheng time to catch up. Don't you see the state he's in right now? Completely enchanted. No matter what you tell him, nothing will get through. Once they meet, Huacheng will probably only need to charm him with a few lies and he'll believe him, just like someone who's under a fox spirit's thrall." Fengshen considered this and decided that what Muqing had said made some sense. "Your Highness," he sighed, "we didn't intend to deceive you, but his behavior towards you is really unseemly. I can't even speak of it. Please, just come with us." "Let's go," said Muqing. Muqing's words weren't a suggestion or a plea. They were a command. He must have stuck a command talisman on Shilian's back, done in his own blood. A command talisman could ostensibly make its target obey the spellcaster's every whim, but in reality it could only realize simple commands like "do not speak, walk, or stop." Do not speak, walk, stop, run, and so on. More complicated commands were harder to execute, and the talisman couldn't confound the target's mind. Only powerful ghosts like the Brocade Immortal could manage such things. The two hurried along with Shilian in tow again, but they were stopped by a pile of rubble blocking the way. Fengshen saw that their path had been cut off and wondered aloud, "Why are these rocks blocking the way? Why we can't get any further. Weren't you the one who knocked them down? Why are you asking me?" Mooching said. You're the one leading the way, so you're the one who messed up. Why are we somewhere we've already been anyway? Why would you circle back around?" Fengshen questioned. Mooching refused to be questioned. "What a joke. I don't know the roads here, so how could I possibly lead? Haven't we been running around randomly all this time?" Sensing that they were about to get into another argument, Fengshen waved it off. "Never mind, it's not worth wasting my breath on you. Let's just dig through this." Hua-Chang was pursuing them from behind, so they could only go forward. Retreat wasn't an option if they wanted to avoid running into him. Blocking roads was easy, but digging through that blockage was much harder. They made Shilian stand obediently in the corner while Fengshen rained down random punches on the boulders, and Mooching, with his bulging veins, swung his mighty Zan Madao to shatter the rocks. They cleared the path in no time. Rubble rolled and dust clouded the air, but just as they were about to call Shilian over, they saw a red-clad figure standing in a new open passage amidst the clouds of settling dust. Shilian's eyes instantly lit up. It was Hua-Chang. The Ghost King's gaze was cold. He stood silently with his hands clasped behind his back. "Why won't you go away?" Fengshen blurted. This man was the very definition of persistence. They had left him in the dust, now he managed to appear ahead of them. How long had he been standing there, waiting in silence as they cleared away the obstacle blocking their way to deliver themselves right into his hands? He was frighteningly tenacious and sinister. Fengshen and Mooching quickly backed away, putting some distance between them. Hua-Chang didn't look at them. His gaze moved to the side of the tunnel, and he took a step in Shilian's direction. Fengshen and Mooching realized why he was here and rushed to Shilian's side in a flash to guard him. "Don't come any closer," they both shouted at once. Hua-Chang's expression turned extremely dark. Normally, if someone dared to tell Crimson Rainsop Flower to stay away, he wouldn't give a damn. He'd simply laugh and approach anyway. But at this moment, he seemed genuinely wary, not daring to move recklessly. He paused in his step. After a moment, he finally spoke. His words came slowly, and his tone was calm. "What do you two mean by this?" Fengshen, however, cut straight to the point. "You don't need to pretend anymore. We know this is your old lair. We've already seen those divine statues and the murals too. We've seen everything." Hua-Chang wasn't directly facing them. He stood at an angle. The hands tucked behind his back seemed to jerk at Fengshen's words, and two of his fingers curled stiffly inward. "His Highness saw it too?" he asked softly, inclining his head. His voice was very, very quiet. While he still sounded unfazed, his voice was slightly cracked and obviously strange. "No," Shilian cried mentally. The truth was that he hadn't seen much, but at the moment, Shilian could neither move nor speak. He could only lean dutifully against the wall in the corner, which made it look like he was hiding behind the other two. It must have seemed like he was afraid to face Hua-Chang and refused to speak to him. Fengshen drew his bow. "That's right. We now understand your intentions. With respect for your position as a Ghost King, if you still know self-respect and conduct yourself with any dignity, we ask that you don't come near His Highness again." Shilian's feelings were like a cottage on fire, black smoke rolling heavily and thick. Hua-Chang should have noticed that something was amiss, and Shilian could only hope that he would question him directly to find out what was wrong. But Hua-Chang's current state seemed to render him unable to notice a thing. "Don't go near him?" he said coldly. "What right do either of you have to say that to me?" Not waiting for the response, Hua-Chang's eyes flashed dangerously. "But you've reminded me that we have unfinished business to settle." The moment he finished speaking, countless shrieking silver butterflies shot forth towards them. In face of such an attack, a spiritual shield was the only option. Fengshen and Mooching cried in unison, "Shield!" A butterfly deluge was blocked by the butterfly deluge was blocked by the formless spiritual shield and shattered into shimmering silver light, which rapidly recrystallized into new silver butterflies and attacked once more. The onslaught was completely unstoppable. Fengshen and Muqing gave ground slowly and as they kept their shield up, and Huacheng steadily advanced step by step. The riling winds raised by his spiritual aura stirred his raven hair, and it danced wildly with every gust. The mad fury and violence in his eyes was on full display under the binding light of the silver butterflies. Defending alone wouldn't get them anywhere. Fengshen and Muqing exchanged a look, silently agreeing to go on the attack. They maintained the spiritual shield as they charged forward. Then, when weapons flashing, the three began to fight in the narrow stone corridor. Fengshen battled the wrath butterflies while Muqing faced Huacheng. Huacheng flung out an arm, and the scimitar Eming appeared in his left hand, ready to strike. This was the first time Shilian witnessed Eming fighting seriously. The scimitar was long, slender, and chillingly murderous. It gleamed with threatening silver light. It was truly a wicked blade, overflowing with evil. The battle was truly thrilling to behold. Huacheng stood his ground, and even when fighting 2 against 1, Shilian watched unblinkingly with bated breath. With a flick of Eming's blade, Muqing's Zanmadao was knocked off course and into the rocks. Although Muqing still had a grip on the hilt, the blade was stuck. He couldn't yank his weapon out. This only shocked Muqing for a moment, but Huacheng's fist was already swinging right into his jaw. The punch sent Muqing flying through the air, and he finally lost grip of his saber's hilt. Meanwhile, each arrow Fengshen shot at the butterflies was snapped by their sharp wings. The sheer number of butterflies was ultimately too difficult to deal with. At this point, both victory and defeat were a foregone conclusion. Countless white silk tendrils slithered from the corners of the corridor and wrapped Fengshen and Muqing into giant cocoons once more. The more they struggled, the tighter their bindings became. Muqing tore at the silk as he yelled, "I knew you were the one who threw us into that pit. This isn't spider silk," Fengshen exclaimed. It dawned on Shilian as well. It was butterfly silk. Butterflies emerged from the chrysales, which they wove from their own silk. This strange white silk was completely of Huacheng's making, and it was probably linked to his aggressive wrath butterflies. With the match decided, Huacheng sheathed his scimitar. I threw you in to save you from disaster. Otherwise, you would have never had a chance to find this cave of 10,000 gods," he jeered. "And this was your yelling that caused the avalanche. Why don't you thank me for saving your puny little lives?" Huacheng had probably planned to wait out the avalanche at first, getting Shilian out once the snowy mountain quieted down. Huacheng had probably planned to wait out the avalanche at first, getting Shilian out once the snowy mountain quieted down and leaving Fengshen and Muqing behind. But unexpectedly, the pair had gnawed through the chrysales and made enough noise that Shilian had discovered them, which led to all the trouble afterward. If not for that, Shilian might have really just followed Huacheng straight out without looking at a single divine statue. But the worst-case scenario had come to pass. Every secret had been torn out and exposed under the sun. Despite the anxiety roiling under the surface, Shilian's body was still sat obediently in place. Huacheng's gaze was growing colder and more intense as he stared condescendingly down at Muqing. "It seems I'm the only one with a real talent for sabers, not you," he quietly stated. Muqing's throat was bound by a few bands of white silk, and his face changed from red and black as he was strangled, blood leaking from the corners of his lips as he choked. You, I see, I get it. Feng Shen gritted out through his teeth. What do you get? I get why this bastard hates me so much now, Wu Qing said. He probably hates you for the same reason. Why? Feng Shen demanded through his coughs. Because he's insane, Wu Qing said hatefully through his own coughing. Have you forgotten what was in those murals? He was that young soldier His Highness wanted to promote after he returned from Beiji Hill. His Highness said his swordplay was good, and that he was well suited for the saber. Why'd you make him hate you? Feng Shen questioned. Wu Qing didn't reply. Bam! Hua Cheng landed another punch on Wu Qing's face. Hua Cheng gave a chilling smile and answered on Wu Qing's behalf. Because he kicked me out of the armory. To think Wu Qing had done something like that. Feng Shen was astonished. What the fuck? Why'd you do that? How did it piss you off? Wu Qing's face was covered in blood. I just made him go home. It's not like it's a good fight. It's not like it's good to fight in a war. How could I have known that he would wind up being this crazy and holding grudges all this time? Hua Cheng cut him off with another punch, so forceful that Wu Qing's face almost contorted when it landed. Bam! Hua Cheng smiled. Did you think I couldn't guess why you kicked me out? Wu Qing looked away and Hua Cheng snickered. I guess it's clear which one of us is actually useless trash. Wu Qing spat out a mouthful of blood and grimaced like he'd been stabbed where it hurt. He replied spitefully, slowly. Thank goodness I kicked you out. If we'd kept you in the armory and let you get closer to His Highness, were you going to watch him all day with your mind full of unspeakable filth? Disgusting. Shilian's heart squeezed violently. Hua Cheng had his fist raised at first, but it froze in midair when Wu Qing spat out the word disgusting. Veins bulged on the back of his pale hand. The fingers clenched and loosened, then clenched. A long moment later, Hua Cheng said icily, For now, I won't argue with you on the point. But tell me one thing, and tell me honestly. Your argument before the avalanche, is that true? Wu Qing looked at Feng Shen with eyes wide. Feng Shen looked back, his eyes rounded, bulging. Neither of them knew how to respond. My patience is limited, Hua Cheng said sharply. Answer me on the count of 3. 1, 2. Such a rush for an answer, an idea struck Wu Qing within his panic. Your Highness, run! He cried. The moment the command was issued, the damn spell stuck to Shilian's back forced him to bolt. Hua Cheng swung around towards him, and 2 bands of white butterfly silk shot from the corners of the cave to bind Shilian. He fell to the ground before he'd even managed 2 steps. To an observer, it looked like Shilian had been frozen in terror this whole time, or perhaps that he'd been struggling to accept the truth about Hua Cheng, or had simply decided he didn't want to intervene in their fight. Now it looked like he finally decided to flee, but had failed. The truth was, though, that he had never even considered running away. Shilian's hands and feet were tightly bound by the thick white silk. He lay sprawled on the ground with his black hair and white sleeves splayed out around him. His bamboo hat had rolled off to one side. Hua Cheng slowly turned to him, paused for a moment, and then made his way to Shilian's side. He'd only taken a few steps before Feng Shen could no longer hold back a desperate shout. Hua Cheng! Hua Cheng paused in his step and tilted his head. Let His Highness go, Feng Shen forced out a plea. He's suffered enough. Don't. To him. Hua Cheng didn't reply. He came to Shilian's side, and with one hand on his back and the other on his knee, he swept him into his arms. Shilian lay against Hua Cheng's chest. Even though they were sealed in those giant white chrysalises, he could see Feng Shen and Wu Qing's expressions. Feng Shen looked like he was watching a lamb entering a tiger's mouth, as if Shilian was going to be ripped apart and devoured, and he started yelling. Mooching had started tearing at the white silk with his teeth again, but the awkward angle meant his struggles came to nothing. Huacheng knew the pathways of this cave of 10,000 gods like the back of his hand. After many forks and turns, the two figures and their voices soon disappeared. Carrying Shilian in his arms, Huacheng moved deeper into the darkness of the cave's innermost dens. The only light around them came from the gently fluttering silver wrath butterflies. Shilian couldn't see the expressions on Huacheng's face and couldn't feel the tension in his body, but could feel the tension in his body. Huacheng had led him like this in the past, but it was obvious that something had changed. He wouldn't even touch Shilian's neck or hands directly. Shilian kept eyeing Huacheng's face, trying to blink hard enough that he'd notice, but Huacheng kept avoiding his gaze. Huacheng took him to a chamber with a stone bed where he had quickly brought him and set him down. As he lay Shilian down on the bed, he noticed something and checked Shilian's back. "They cast a spell on you?" Shilian was overjoyed. He finally discovered it. Still, it had taken him incredibly long to notice that there was something off about Shilian, which just showed how badly Huacheng had been caught off guard. Shilian waited for him to remove the command talisman from his back, but Huacheng's hand paused before he touched the offering paper. Before he touched the offending paper. In the end, Huacheng withdrew his hand and laid Shilian flat on the bed. "Don't worry, Your Highness. I won't kill those two useless pieces of trash. For now," Huacheng said in a low voice, perhaps attempting to reassure Shilian, "even though I'd really like to murder them." There was a layer of thick, soft, fresh hay on the stone bed. It didn't jab Shilian at all as he lay there limply, but he was so anxious that his insides were smoking. He couldn't understand why Huacheng wouldn't release him from the spell. Just as he was trying to desperately struggle away of its control, Huacheng reached for a sash around Shilian's waist and began to untie it. In an unfortunate coincidence, that was the moment when the command talisman on Shilian's back started to fade. He kicked out hard with one leg, and escaped his lips. His spasm looked like nothing more than a jerk of dying fish, twitching in its last attempt of life and objecting with no real power. Still, Huacheng froze instantly and withdrew his hand. "I won't!" At that point, Huacheng seemed to decide that his tone was too harsh and that his actions might be scaring or repulsing Shilian. He backed away a few steps and softened his voice. His expression was cautious and resigned, but otherwise unreadable. "Your Highness, I won't do anything to you," he said in a low voice. Don't be scared." Shilian finally understood. Huacheng still wasn't sure what kind of response he would receive from Shilian upon releasing the spell, so he was refusing to hear it any longer. Huacheng seemed to be holding back some sort of urge, and he once again assured him in a quiet tone that sounded like a vow. "Your Highness, trust me." He said that exact phrase before, but this time all his normal confidence was gone. Shilian wanted to answer him, but couldn't. He didn't dare struggle anymore, lest Huacheng's misunderstandings deepen. He could only lie there flat and motionless, waiting patiently for the power of the command talisman to fade entirely. Seeing that Shilian had stopped resisting, Huacheng approached again, reached out, and gingerly finished untying Shilian's belt. "Sunlong?" Shilian called out in his mind. Shilian wholeheartedly believed that Huacheng would never take advantage of a hopeless person, but this new development was completely unexpected. He couldn't help but widen his eyes, and Huacheng set about loosening Shilian's clothes, but he seemed to be avoiding touching Shilian's body, which slowed him down. It was a long while before Shilian's underrobes were removed and the inner robes followed. A wrath butterfly perched on the curve of Shilian's shoulder, and a warm, tingling feeling crawled over his skin. It was only then that Shilian realized the state he was in. His skin was red and slightly swollen, even cracked in some areas. When the silver butterfly perched on him, his injuries had started to heal. This was frostbite he had gotten from tumbling all over the frozen mountain, but Shilian hadn't noticed it since he was fairly used to the pain at this point. If he had frostbite, then he had frostbite. Even if he hadn't noticed the injuries earlier, he probably would have left them to heal on their own. But Hua Cheng knew better than Shi Lian himself where he was hurt, and he wouldn't let it go. He wouldn't address Shi Lian's injuries no matter what. Shi Lian's thoughts were interrupted when Hua Cheng took his arm and raised it. There was even more patches of frostbite on his hands and feet. Many of the spots were bleeding due to all the frantic running and pulling he had been subjected to recently. Shi Lian wasn't afraid of pain, but he was ticklish, and in spite of himself, fragmented memories from years past surfaced in his mind. The trembling, heated hands of a boy in a dark cave, random panic touches, irregular breathing, and racing hearts. At first, those memories were hazy and incredibly faint. Shi Lian had packed them away and tossed them into the corner of his mind long ago. But as the memories began to resurface, they had a surprisingly different taste, and it made Shi Lian want to hold his head and scream, especially with Hua Cheng right in front of him, doing very nearly the same thing he had done once upon a time. Shi Lian's face and mind were burning. He was afraid Hua Cheng would see his distress, but Hua Cheng didn't look at him at all. He fulfilled his promise completely and never crossed the line. He kept his head slightly turned away, averting his gaze from Shi Lian's half-exposed white shoulder. Suddenly, a jeering voice rang out from behind Hua Cheng. "Hua Cheng, you madman! What do you think you're doing to His Highness? You're disgusting!" Hua Cheng whipped his head towards the voice. Shi Lian looked past him to see who had reached the entrance of the cavern chamber. The speaker was Mooching, with Feng Xin beside him. Despite being so recently wrapped in giant chrysalises, they had somehow broken free and found this place. Their faces had gone pale at the scene inside the cavern, and Shi Lian's face paled in turn. What an awful sight. Feng Shi pointed at Hua Cheng, then pointed at Shi Lian with his clothes peeled halfway off. It was a long moment before he could squeeze out, You, let him go right now." Hua Cheng quickly pulled Shi Lian's clothes back into place. "You useless trash dare hunt us down," he said coldly. "I think you're tired of living." "Keep your filthy hands off him. Does the ugly toad want a taste of swan meat?" Mooching sneered. Never mind dreaming for 800 years. You can hope for 1,000 more, but don't even think of touching a single one of His Highness's fingers." Shi Lian's heart dropped, but while the comments annoyed him, he could sense that something was amiss. What was wrong with these two? They shouldn't have spewed such malicious words, even if Hua Cheng had beaten them to a pulp earlier. It was especially uncharacteristic of Mooching. It seemed like they were purposely trying to provoke Hua Cheng, but there was no reason for that. They knew they couldn't beat him, so what did they want? Moreover, their tones subtly pointed the spear in Shi Lian's direction. It was like they wanted to stir up confusion, as though they wanted Hua Cheng to do something to Shi Lian in a fit of anger. Sure enough, darkness flashed over Shi Lian's balanced face as he threatened softly, "Since you both came seeking death." Shi Lian could see the naked, murderous intent in his eyes, and horror filled him. "Don't!" he cried. Too late. Hua Cheng unsheathed his scimitar, and Umming flashed cold. Shi Lian and Mooching were both startled by the strike, and they reflexively looked down at themselves and saw no visible injuries on their bodies. Just a moment later, before they had the chance to breathe in relief or retaliate, the upper halves of their bodies split from their lower halves and fell to the floor with a thud. Blood spurted and gushed, spilling over the flooding ground. Shi Lian had never expected things to go like this. He lay limply on the stone bed and completely dumbstruck. Hua Cheng had actually sliced Feng Xin and Mooching in half. They both weren't dead yet. They tumbled on the ground, one gritted his teeth and the other yelled furiously. It was a sight too tragic to witness. Hua Cheng's expression was frigid, and he sheathed his scimitar. His face was dotted with only a few drops of blood, but the tinge of red complemented the aura of evil surrounding him and made him look even more striking. Hua Cheng stood in the pool of blood for a moment, then turned to walk towards Shi Lian. Shilian stared with wide eyes at Hua Cheng's grim approach. By the time Shilian snapped out of his stupor, Hua Cheng had already reached his side. He clutched one of Shilian's hands and pulled him up into an intense embrace. "How could I possibly let go?" he whispered. Shilian couldn't speak, being held so tightly in his arms, and then Hua Cheng whispered something else in his ear. Shilian's heart was pounding so wildly that he thought it might jump out of his chest when he suddenly felt his body release. The command talisman that Mooching stuck on his back had finally been released. Even though Hua Cheng said he wouldn't let go, he still loosened his embrace just a little and let Shilian leave his hold once he released himself from the command talisman. Shilian took a deep breath and leapt to his feet and charged over to the pool of blood on the ground. "Fengshen? Mooching, are you two all right?" Mooching's injuries were more severe. The blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and the light in his eyes had faded, but Fengshen still had a breath left, and he gripped Shilian's hand tightly. "Your Highness." Shilian clutched his hand in turn. What do you want to say?" Fengshen swallowed a mouthful of blood and managed to grit out, "Watch out for Hua Cheng. Don't go near him. He's a monster." It seemed that Fengshen had used up all that remained of his strength to give Shilian that warning before he died. Unexpectedly, the expression on Shilian's face gradually calmed. "Monster?" He let go of Fengshen's hand and rose to his feet. "I wonder, is he more of a monster than you two?" That shocked Fengshen. Without pausing for a response, Shilian drew Fengshen and pierced Fengshen's heart, nailing him dead to the ground in a flash. "Your Highness, you..." Fengshen sputtered in shock, but before he could finish, he stopped breathing. Shilian withdrew Fengshen from Fengshen's heart and shook it clean of blood before he retreated to Hua Cheng's side. He kept his sword pointed at the corpses on the ground all the while. "Now that the blood has been spilled, there's no need to keep talking through those skins." A jeering laugh echoed from the ground. Mooching's body had been sliced in half at the waist, but his head twisted around to show that it was the one laughing. His upper half had sprawled face down, so even if it turned its head, its cheeks should have still been pressed to the ground, but the corpse's head kept turning until it was fully backwards and lifted it, laughing at Shilian all the while. As suspected, these were not the real Fengshen and Mooching, but imposters from who knew where. The real Fengshen and Mooching were still trapped in those giant white chrysalises, trying to gnaw themselves free. That was what Hua Cheng had whispered when he released Shilian from the command talisman. Their faces were pale from shock and horror, but because their faces were not pale from shock and horror, but because they weren't human to begin with. Shilian flashed his sword. Fengshen and Mooching both smiled chillingly and replied in unison, "As you wish." They then melted into puddles of something that resembled thick blood. Hua Cheng moved to shield Shilian. The two bloody puddles flowed across the ground and merged into one, bubbling like they were boiling. Soon the pool formed into a shape of a man. A chill spiked up Shilian's spine from the waist to neck as he watched the indescribable mask contort itself to grow bit by bit. Soon, Fengshen and Mooching were completely gone. The person who replaced them was a tall, slender young man dressed in white. Judging by his size, the man seemed to be about 17 or 18 years of age. He was wearing a mask, half of it crying, half of it smiling. While his face couldn't be seen, a youthful, crisp, bright voice came from behind the mask. "How are you, Shilian?" he asked warmly. Shilian's lips twitched unconsciously as his mind went numb. Hua Cheng had been shielding him, but now the Ghost King raised his blade and lunged at the man. The white-clad man was dauntless in the face of Ming's wicked sharpness, and the blade missed him by mere millimeters as he sidestepped. In a span of a second, he flashed behind Hua Cheng. He reached for Shi Lian like he wanted to touch his face. Silver light stroked at Hua Cheng's, and Hua Cheng blocked that hand, shielding Shi Lian once more. Hua Cheng's voice was cold. "Keep your filthy hands off of him." He threw the warning right back at him. The white-clad man's right hand was severed by Ming's slash, and the limb fell on the ground. But the man seemed that he had barely noticed the injury. He simply shook out his expansive sleeve to briefly hide the severed limb, then shook the sleeve back again, and a new hand had grown in the old one's place. His fingers curled into claws, and he aimed directly for Hua Cheng's right eye. It all happened in under a second. Hua Cheng dodged just as fast, but the attack still left 2 bloody scratches on his cheek. For the first time, Hua Cheng faced an opponent he couldn't overtake in speed. His gaze turned sharp, and he changed tactics on the spot. He called forth millions of wrath butterflies, and they swarmed the man in a frenzy. The myrid butterflies wrapped the white-clad man inside of a large, shimmering silver chrysalis, but that likely wouldn't last long. Hua Cheng was about to grab Shi Lian when the silver butterflies shrieked and exploded into sparkling powder. Seeing the subtle change to Hua Cheng's expression as so many wrath butterflies were destroyed at once, Shi Lian knew that this wasn't good. The white-clad man had blown apart the wrath butterflies, and now he was hidden within shimmering silver powder that choked the air. His newly grown hand struck out once more, aiming for Hua Cheng's right eye. This time, it was Shi Lian's turn. He pulled out Feng Shin and slashed. His strike didn't chop off the white-clad man's hand, nor his entire arm. It very nearly bisected him entirely. Seizing the chance, Hua Cheng called out, "Your Highness, let's go." Shi Lian knew they shouldn't get entangled in this fight, and that they should quit while they were ahead. He returned, and the two rushed out of the cavern together. They bolted down the dark tunnel, unhampered by the obstacles. "It's him? He really didn't die?" Shi Lian exclaimed as he ran. Hua Cheng led the way. He was faster and dashed easily, setting up butterfly formations and silk traps along the way to trip up any pursuers. He might not be the original. Shi Lian came to an abrupt stop and clutched his head. "No, I can feel it. He's the same. Not only is he still alive, but he's stronger than before. Someone let him be reborn. How could he transform so easily into Feng Shen and Mu Qing? It's very difficult to impersonate heavenly officials. It should be nearly impossible to create fake skins of them." Hearing his tone go so frantic, Hua Cheng also stopped and turned back. He took Shi Lian's hand and gripped it. Don't be scared, Your Highness. He might not really be stronger. There's another possibility. He could be very familiar with Feng Shen and Mu Qing. That's why he could create fake skins of them. He must be someone all of you..." Before he finished, Shi Lian's gaze fell on the hand that was clutching his own. Hua Cheng's words and expressions both froze. He paled and withdrew his hand, tucked it behind his back, and turned to continue onward. Shi Lian, however, did not follow. "Sunlung," he called out. Hua Cheng's body stiffened. He paused in a step, but didn't look back. He only acknowledged, "Your Highness," in a carefully calm voice. "A lot just happened, and everyone's a little flustered and confused," Shi Lian said from behind him. Hua Cheng answered. "Everything is still kind of confusing, but I want to take the time to ask you a question," Shi Lian continued. "I hope you'll answer me honestly and seriously." "All right," Hua Cheng agreed. "Who exactly is that noble, gracious, special someone?" Shi Lian asked solemnly. Hua Cheng's finger, the one that was tied with the red affinity knot, subtly twitched a few times. He was silent for a while before he eventually answered. "If Your Highness already knows, then why ask?" Shi Lian nodded. "I see. So I don't misunderstand you. It really is true? Hua Cheng didn't respond. After a pause, Shilian asked, his tone flat. Don't you want to know how I feel about this? Hua Cheng inclined his head slightly. It was like he wanted to glance back, but was too afraid to look Shilian in the eye. Only the 2 streaks of blood on his cheek could be seen. Your Highness, would you please not tell me? His voice cracked as he asked. I'm sorry, Shilian said. Something like this has to be made clear. Hua Cheng didn't need to breathe, but he still sucked in a deep breath. Although his face was awfully pale, he still smiled and replied courteously, That's true. It's for the best. He was like a criminal on death row, waiting for his sentence. He closed his eyes. Yet his eye couldn't remain closed for long. Soon it snapped open once more. A pair of arms suddenly circled him from behind and caught him in a forceful embrace. Shilian buried his face in Hua Cheng's back, but he didn't speak either. Though nothing was said, it was enough. In that, it was a long time before Shilian felt the man he was hugging turn around. Hua Cheng fervently returned his embrace, engulfing Shilian in his arms. From above his head, Shilian heard Hua Cheng's staggered response. Your Highness, you really will be the death of me. Just then, the sound of an explosion echoed through the deep recesses of the cave. A blinding white light flashed through the darkness, followed by a series of shrieks from the silver butterflies. They both looked up and their expressions changed. Shilian loosened his grip on Hua Cheng's sleeve. Let's talk later, Shilian said. And thus the 2 continued on, except now they were running hand in hand. Shilian's face was hot, but he spoke with force calm, like nothing had happened. Sunlung, how did you discover that the Fengshen and Muqing who were approaching us were dummies? Where are the real ones? Hua Cheng was in essentially the same state. I left behind the raft butterflies to monitor the 2 useless pieces of trash. How could there be 2 more of them? Don't worry, Your Highness, they're fine. They won't die. Then we have to release Fengshen and Muqing from the chrysalises, Shilian said. It'll be bad if he finds them while they have no way to fight back. This way. Follow me, Hua Cheng answered. The Cave of 10,000 Gods was indeed his territory, even when they came to crossroads that branched into multiple different paths. He immediately and accurately knew which one to take. It wasn't long before he returned to the area they had left Fengshen and Muqing. Even from the distance, they could hear the 2 flinging accusations at each other and yelling. Why did you tell Your Highness to run? Now you've done it, he's been carried off. What should I have done with him? Stand around and be butchered? Huh? You just watched him You just wanted him to distract Hua Cheng and lead him away? Am I... Why did you tell His Highness to run off? Now you've done it, he's been carried off. What should I have had him... What? Should I have had him stand around to be butchered? Huh? You wanted him to distract Hua Cheng and lead him away. Am I wrong? Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Both men in the giant white chrysalises on the wall were simultaneously gnawing at the silk and yelling at each other, and they were so surprised when they saw him return that they forgot to spit out the white silk dangling from their mouths. How did you escape? Shilian's bamboo hat was still on the ground where he had dropped it, and he quickly picked it up and tied it around his neck. The heavy white silk released Fengshen and Muqing before retreating into the shadows. The 2 of them tumbled to the ground, beaten black and blue. When they saw Hua Cheng emerge from behind Shilian, their faces twitched. They probably thought they were in for another round of beating, or that things would otherwise get rough again. However, when Fengshen reached out to grab Shilian's arm and pull him back, Shilian grabbed hold of Hua Cheng first. Your Highness? Fengshen was flummoxed. Hua Cheng was already starting to lead the way once more. Guga, this way. As if those two dared to follow him. Your Highness, are you still with him? Your Highness, why are you still with him? Fengshen questioned. Didn't I tell you he's lost his mind? Wu Qing said. He's completely enchanted. Shilian didn't bother to argue. He just gently but very firmly held on to Hua Cheng. There's no time to explain. Let's get out of here. There's an enemy after us. With Shilian holding him like that, Hua Cheng's eyes began to twinkle. A moment later, he smiled. I suggest you both hold your tongues and follow. I'm in a good mood, so I won't fight you. For now. Fengshen and Mu Qing were left in complete disbelief by this display. Complicated expressions plastered on their faces. They just couldn't comprehend why Shilian still walked so nonchalantly beside a terrifying devil who had stalked him for over 800 years with a mind full of unspeakable thoughts. It was like playing with fire and delighting in the burns. Mu Qing was skeptical, but eventually chose to focus on the other point. You said there's an enemy here? This cave of 10,000 gods is his territory. So what kind of enemy could there possibly be? Did this enemy give him those scratches on his face? I doubt there are many out there who can injure Crimson Rainsault Flower. It's White No-Face, Shilian replied. At the sound of the name, Fengshen and Wu Qing's faces both changed, and they followed Shilian without another word. They knew well that Shilian could joke or lie about anything except for one man. Shilian would never make light of him, nor would he ever mistake him. Even though they'd just been fighting each other to the death in the Cave of 10,000 Gods, now they were fleeing like mad together. Just what's going on? Wu Qing demanded. Shilian gave them an account of the white-clad man who had stolen their appearances, and they were both stunned. Disguised as us? How is that possible? It's true, Shilian said. Everything happened so fast and I didn't get a good look, but it was absolutely you two at a glance. Fengshen was dumbfounded. But how can White No-Face still exist? Didn't the Emperor kill him? I wouldn't be surprised if that thing can't be killed so easily, Mu Qing said. Maybe it died at the same time, but I'm sure it could revive itself given the right chance. That reminded Shilian of something, and he turned to Hua Cheng. Senlun, right after we made it into Mount Tonglu territory, you woke from your stasis with a start. You woke from your stasis with a start and urged us to hide from something. Did you sense him? Hua Cheng gave a slight nod. Yes. I knew it, Shilian mumbled. We chose the path to the west, but after that, he was the one who was on the eastern path who killed thousands of ghosts. He's been reborn, but he's still a little weak. He needs to use the nefarious creatures coming to Mount Tonglu as a stepping stone. Now he's recovered and might be even stronger than before. After all, he was the world's first supreme ghost king. As they talked, Mu Qing noticed something amiss. Your Highness, do you know where he's taking us? I don't think this is the way out. It was Hua Cheng who replied. Of course this isn't the way out, because there is no way out right now. Fengshen was astonished. What? Isn't this your cave of territory? You can't be lost. Of course not, Shilian replied in Hua Cheng's defense. White No-Face is blocking the path to the cave's exit, Hua Cheng explained. If you think you can defeat him in your current state, then by all means don't follow me. I won't stop you. Go right ahead. Fengshen and Mu Qing were both from Xinla, of course, and just like Shilian, the creature had left an incredible shadow on their hearts. They didn't want to face him unless absolutely necessary. Fengshen gazed upward. Can we punch through the top of the cave to get out? The snowy mountain is above us. Do you want to start another avalanche? Hua Cheng mocked. Unfortunately, they had left the Earthmaster shovel with Yunyu in case of emergency. Even if they did have it, none of them had studied how to use it, so they wouldn't be able to dig an escape route without making a racket and drawing attention. Then why are we running around aimlessly? As long as we run around aimlessly, he'll chase us, and we can lure him away from the exit, Shilian explained. And then you two can use that chance to escape. Mooching immediately caught the issue. Wait, you two? You mean you want to split up? One group is the bait to lead him away, while the other group escapes on their own? Exactly, Shilian said. The Emperor must be informed that White No-Face reappeared in the world. Once you both escape, find a way to notify the heavens. Wait, Mooching cut him off. You've already decided who's going to be the bait and who's going to leave? Shilian shook his head. I didn't decide. White No-Face did. Mooching understood and didn't say another word. There was nothing that they could do to choose who is pursued. Among their group, White No-Face would certainly be most interested in chasing Shilian. I will stay with you to face him, Fengshen declared without hesitation. In an emergency, Mooching had always been the one that Shilian sent back to make a report, and Fengshen had always stayed behind to assist him. It seemed that ancient history was about to repeat itself, but Shilian glanced at Huacheng. Thanks, but there's no need. Sunlung will stay with me. How can he be the one to stay? Shilian blurted. Huacheng's brow furrowed ominously, but Shilian only replied, I trust him. Although his voice was gentle, he was firm in his stance. Fengshen was stunned in spite of himself. Your Highness. Shilian patted his shoulder. You two go together. Mount Tonglu has closed its gates, so it's hard to say whether you'll even be able to get out to spread the word. Besides, don't you still need to search for Longcheng and the child? Fengshen's face turned glum at the reminder. A wrath butterfly emerged from the engravings on the vambrance around Huacheng's waist. Follow it, he said. The two looked at Huacheng and then at Shilian. In the end, Mooching said simply, You two want yourselves. With that, he turned and hurried after the silver butterfly down another tunnel. A moment later, Fengshen followed. The four thus parted at the fork in the road, and Shilian watched their retreating backs. Another series of rumbling explosions echoed in the distance. The pair exchanged a look. He's here, Huacheng said darkly. Lead me, Shilian said. The white-clad man had come for Shilian, as expected. To ensure he was kept at a safe distance, Huacheng set up wrath butterfly formations at various points of the caves to monitor the situation and slow their pursuer down. Every time the explosions went off, the wrath butterflies shrieked. Huacheng's expression grew grimmer, and Shilian's heart ached. They wound around a corner, and after the corner, they wound around corner after corner until finally they reached a chamber. Shilian couldn't help but sigh. I can't believe it. So many silver butterflies have been lost. While the wrath butterflies didn't have a good reputation in the three realms, Shilian saw them as nothing but sweet, adorable little spirits. He couldn't help but feel for them. They ceaselessly launched their suicidal attacks just to delay the enemy a few moments more, but Huacheng only snorted. His gaze seemed to penetrate the thick rock walls, and he said, Don't worry. If he kills one, I'll make 10 more. Fast and furious as a storm. I will never back down. We'll see who's left standing in the end. Shilian's heart skipped a beat for a moment, and he thought, Oh no, this is bad. Although Huacheng had only displayed it subconsciously, Shilian really was quite weak to his aggressive, rebellious confidence. Another moment paused, and Huacheng slowed his pace, seeming like he had received a sort of signal. He turned to Shilian. He's been led away. Those two are almost out. Great, Shilian said. Now we can take our time to come up with strategy. There's no rush now, Huacheng said. He's been left far behind. We can hide here for a while and think of a battle plan. They both trailed off, and an awkward tension suddenly bloomed between them. This wasn't the kind of awkwardness that stemmed from embarrassment. Rather, they were both feeling strangely shy. With the creature hot on their trail and Fengshen and Mooching with them, The feeling hadn't been nearly so obvious, but although Shilian said, "Let's talk later," now that later had arrived, they'd caught their breaths and had no idea what to say. Shilian coughed lightly twice to clear his throat, then scratched his cheek with a finger. No matter what gesture he made, nothing felt quite right. He wanted to speak, but he worried that whatever he said would sound too abrupt or too silly, like he was trying too hard. In the end, he just hoped Huacheng would say something first. However, Huacheng's expression was just as strained. On the surface, he looked like he might have been seriously thinking through their battle plans, but it was hard to say whether that was true. The hands clenched behind his back were trembling slightly. They walked past one particular divine statue. Most of the carvings in the Cave of 10,000 Gods were about the same size as the man himself, but this one was rougher in craftsmanship and was shorter by half. When Shilian passed it, he casually peeled off the veil and covered his head. He casually peeled off the veil covering its head, and his eyes lit up. "Sunlong, did you carve this too? This one too?" Huacheng looked over and fell silent. It took him a moment to reply. "It was from my beginner years, Gaga. Stop looking at it." It was clearly the truth. The divine statue was quite ugly indeed, even though it was easy to tell that the sculptor had done his utmost to carve the perfect form he saw in his mind. His wish had been left unfulfilled due to the limits of his skills. While it wasn't cockeyed or crooked, the little figure was disproportionate in scale, and it smiled like it was mentally challenged. Despite all that, the sculptor had still managed to include every single detail without fault. Shilian could easily tell that this was a god-pleasing crown prince statue. Its ears had red dots for coral pearl earrings. Shilian silently covered his mouth and turned away. He rubbed hard at his face in an attempt to seem normal. Huacheng didn't know what to say, so he pleaded again as he tried to cover the statue with a veil. "Your Highness, please don't look at it anymore." Don't misunderstand. I think it's really cute," Shilian hastily assured him. But then he realized wasn't he the one Huacheng had sculpted? If he called this thing cute, he was basically calling himself cute. It'd be incredibly thick-skinned of him to lie so blatantly. Shilian couldn't help but laugh out loud. Seeing him like this, Huacheng bowed his head and lowered his lashes as he started to chuckle along with him. As they both laughed, much of the nameless, jittery air cleared away. They continued onward and passed by another statue that was lounging on a stone bed. Its entire body was covered with a layer of thin, smoke-like white satin. Shilian was very curious and was just about to pull off the white veil over the divine statue's body when Huacheng unexpectedly seized his wrist. "Your Highness." Ever since they entered this cave of 10,000 gods, Huacheng had mostly been calling him Your Highness. Shilian looked at him, and while Huacheng let go of his wrist, he still seemed a bit uncomfortable. "I already know it's a statue of me. I still can't look?" Shilian asked. "If Gaga wants to look at statues, the best one I sculpted remains to be seen. I'll show you another time. Don't look at any of the ones in this cave anymore," Huacheng said. Shilian didn't understand. "Why? I think all the divine statues in this cave of 10,000 gods were carved really well. Really. It's a shame if I'd never get to see them. Which reminds me, those murals." "I'll go destroy them," Huacheng said promptly. Seeing that he really planned to head off right now and do that, Shilian grabbed him hastily. Don't. Why destroy them? Just because I saw them? Fine. I'll tell you the truth. I've only actually seen a few. Like the one depicting the Shangyuan heavenly ceremonial procession, and the one of us in the army. I didn't see most of them because Fengshen and Muqing wouldn't let me, so I have absolutely no idea what you painted. Don't destroy them." Only then did Huacheng face him. "Really?" Shilian held on to him and replied with the utmost sincerity. "Really? If you don't want me to look, I won't." Huacheng seemed to quietly sigh in relief, then he smiled. "They're no good anyway. If there's something you want to see, I'll just paint it for you on the spot." This reaction made Shilian even more curious, but he didn't want to spur Hua Cheng into destroying these precious minerals so he could only push down his own desires. After taking a few steps, Shilian suddenly frowned. Something's not right. What is it? Hua Cheng asked. Shilian turned to look at Hua Cheng. White No-Face. Why would he come to Mount Tonglu? Perhaps he hasn't fully regained his power, and he wants to use the kiln to be fully reborn into this world, Hua Cheng replied. If that's true, would it mean he's not currently a supreme? Shilian wondered. That's not entirely impossible, Hua Cheng said. When White No-Faced had dropped his disguise as Fengchen and Muqing and attacked, his abrupt appearance had been both shocking and terrifying. Shilian's first reaction was to assume that their opponent couldn't be defeated, so he'd grabbed Hua Cheng and fled. But they hadn't actually fought him directly for long, so they couldn't precisely gauge White No-Face's current strength. Was he putting on a front, or was he stronger than he seemed? Nothing could be determined from the rash exchange of the blows that only lasted a few seconds. I assume he's gotten stronger when I saw those two fake skins, Shilian muttered, but maybe he hasn't completely recovered. Maybe he's currently at his weakest. Otherwise, why would he come to Mount Tonglu? Maybe I can give it a shot. Give it a shot and take him down? Give it a shot and take him down. Good. I'll go fight him, Hua Cheng immediately replied. Shilian instantly snapped out of it and hastily said, No, don't. Don't face him directly. My giving a shot will be plenty. Supreme Ghost Kings would normally never face each other in combat so easily as evidenced by the way ship-sinking Blackwater and Crimson Raid Flower had been able to coexist in peace. This was because Ghost Kings weren't like heavenly officials. Those profiles were well known to anyone who cared to keep track, from their strengths to their parameters of their powers to the size of their temples and numbers of their worshippers. But Ghost Kings hid their true strength just as they hid their pasts. They possessed no knowledge of each other's abilities, and no one knew the potential consequences of a fight between two supremes. This encouraged them to maintain the balance at all costs. There's no need to worry, Hua Cheng said. The victor hasn't been decided yet. Surely Guga doesn't believe I would let you face him by yourself. Shilian shook his head. It's not that, Song. It's that we're not the same to him. He won't kill me. I can swear it. Why? Hua Cheng questioned. After a moment of hesitation, Shilian chose not to explain. He only said, You don't know how terrifying that creature is? Hua Cheng cut him off. Your Highness, I know, he said grimly. Only then did Shilian remember that Hua Cheng also joined the Shinla army and personally experienced the Shinla battlefield. He's seen the tragedy with his own eyes, the fields piled with corpses, but Hua Cheng didn't know. He hadn't personally witnessed what a horrific battle between Junwu and White No-Face. He hadn't personally witnessed that horrific battle between Junwu and White No-Face. He had never crossed paths with White No-Face directly. Having considered this, Shilian shook his head forcefully. It's not that I don't trust you. It's just... I don't want anything to happen to you. Hua Cheng's eyes twinkled at this. A moment later, he smiled. Guga, don't worry. I'm already dead, so it won't be easy for me to die again. Besides, have you forgotten what I told you before? Unless he finds my ashes, he can't do anything to me. Shilian had forgotten entirely that the ashes were a factor. He quickly said, Wait, everything else aside, Sunlung, have you stored your ashes somewhere safe? A long time ago, Hua Cheng replied. Shilian nodded a moment later. He couldn't help but double-check. Are you sure they're properly hidden? That the hiding place is secure enough and won't be found? To me, it's the safest place in the world, Hua Cheng answered leisurely. Shilian didn't think that there was anything absolute out there, however. You're completely sure? He pressed. Hua Cheng smiled cheerfully. If their hiding place is destroyed, then there's no need for me to exist either. Of course, I'm sure. Although Shilian was rather concerned about what no need to exist meant, they weren't in a safe place, and there could be ears listening in. It wasn't the right time to probe the subject deeper, so he let it go. But it made Shilian want to ask Huacheng just how did he die. Shilian really wanted to know, but he didn't know how to ask. When mortals died, their souls could remain on the corporeal earth depended on their obsessions and attachments. In most cases, anguish and resentment were the strongest fixations. To become a supreme ghost king, one's obsessions would have to be extraordinarily intense. So Shilian was afraid that Huacheng wouldn't be able to handle if he asked about his death. It might cause him pain, like stabbing an old scar, and Shilian himself might not be able to bear the details either. The past 800 years, how had Huacheng entered them? How had Huacheng endured them? A horrifying thought struck Shilian, and he was instantly awash in a cold sweat. He quickly turned to Huacheng. Sunlong. What is it? Huacheng answered. Shilian's fingers twitched slightly. I have another question I want to ask you. By all means, Huacheng replied. Shilian stared at him. Other than in Shinla, did you encounter me at any other place or time at any point in the past 800 years? Huacheng slowly turned his head to look at him. Regretfully, thought I'd never give up and did my utmost to find you. I did not. Shilian pressed. Really? Huacheng looked at him squarely in the eyes. Really? Why does Gaga ask? Shilian sighed an imperceptible breath of relief and forced a smile. Nothing. It's just the way I passed my days in earlier years. Nothing. It's just the way I passed my days in the earlier years wasn't the prettiest sight. I was a mess and very much a failure. I just wouldn't have wanted you to witness that. Huacheng laughed. How could that be? But Shilian didn't laugh at all. It's not a joke. I really was quite the failure. Hearing this, Huacheng withdrew the smile and turned solemn. That's fine. Your Highness, didn't you say so yourself? That's fine too, Your Highness, didn't you say so yourself? Me? Shilian was confused. What did I say? To me. The one basking in an infinite glory is you. The one fallen from grace is also you. What matters is you, not the state of you. Huacheng recited languidly as he gazed at Shilian. He blinked meaningfully, cocking an eyebrow. I feel the same way. Shilian was stunned speechless for a moment, then he quickly slapped his hand over his face to cover it, feeling like his whole head was burning up. Did I say that? You did, Huacheng insisted. Gaga, don't deny it. Shilian used his arm to block his face. I don't think so. Gaga, do you want to see the proof? I'll find it for you, Huacheng said. Shilian's head shot up. No way. Sunlong, have you been recording everything? No, I'm joking. Honestly, don't believe you. Gaga, trust me. I don't trust you anymore. The pair came to a fork in the road. Suddenly, a breeze blew in. Huacheng tilted his head to shield Shilian, raising an arm as if to protect him. It wasn't a strong breeze, and didn't call for anyone to block it, but Huacheng's actions had come completely naturally. The wind passed, leaving strands of hair aflutter, tangled in the same way as Shilian's thoughts. Shilian noticed that Huacheng's expression and the contours of his face were cold when he didn't look. Shilian noticed that Huacheng's expressions and the contours of his face were cold when he wasn't looking his way. Beautiful in his nonchalance, Huacheng didn't even realize he'd moved without hesitation, as if protecting Shilian was innate to him. Sunlong, Shilian blurted again. Sunlong, Shilian blurted again. Huacheng tilted his head to look at him, and only then did he flash a smile. What is it, Your Highness? Shilian felt that Huachong probably didn't notice himself smiling. A clear and powerful voice in Shilian's heart told him that the man really saw him as a god. Shilian's fingers clenched furtively. Once we're out of Mont Tonglu, there's a lot I want to tell you. Huachong nodded lightly. All right, I look forward to it. Have Fengshen and Mooching escape? Have Fengshen and Mooching escaped? Shilian asked. They're already out, Huachong replied. And White No Face? Shilian asked. He didn't catch up to us, and he didn't go to stop them. Where is he now? How far is he from us? Huachong's face changed before he could finish, and he lightly pressed 2 fingers against his right eyebrow. A moment later, he said, He disappeared. How could he disappear? Shilian asked in shock. Huachong remained calm as he focused on searching. He's just gone, completely vanished. This was impossible. Not even a ghost could disappear into the air while surrounded by wrath butterflies in the cave of 10,000 gods. Let me see, Shilian blurted. He gripped Huachong's shoulder with his hands and went tiptoe to touch their foreheads together. Huachong rested a hand on Shilian's waist, then hesitated as if he was going to pull away. In the end, his hand stayed where it was and pulled Shilian even closer. The scene that Huachong had seen moments earlier flashed before Shilian's eyes. The white-clad man strolled through the stone cavern. Countless wrath butterflies rushed him and wrapped him in shimmering, human-shaped chrysalis. In an instant, those butterflies were engulfed in a crackling explosion of silver light, shattering them into a burst of sparkling glitter. Once the silver light faded, the white-clad man was gone. After that, Huachong's right eye brought Shilian elsewhere in the caverns, sweeping through the countless other tunnels. However, the white-clad figure was nowhere to be seen. Shilian was puzzled and pulled away slightly. Could he have left? Now that Whiteface had seen Shilian, he would stop at nothing to harass him. Others might not understand this, but Shilian knew it all too well. Maybe our earlier speculation was correct, Huachong said. His top priority is to use the kiln to regain his supreme status, so he left ahead of us. Huachong's voice was right in Shilian's ear. He only came to himself when he heard those words, and he realized that Huachong's face was cupped in his hands. Shilian had pulled him down, making the taller man bend slightly at the waist. Shilian quickly let go. We have to stop him, he cried. Their mission was to prevent the candidates with the potential to become supreme from reaching Mount Tonglu. They'd run from the white-clad man earlier, but now the situation was clear. They rushed through the countless divine statues in search of him. Before long, they reached the spot where he had disappeared. Other than some divine statues, there was not a single thing to be found. Silver shards of light covering the ground, and the little butterflies that hadn't been completely destroyed by the shockwave were fluttering their broken wings. Shilian bent down. Even if he didn't know whether it would help, he still wanted to cup them in his hands. Just then he heard Huachong's voice from behind him. Guga, come over here by my side. His voice was laced with suppressed anger, but rage wasn't detected by Shilian. Shilian looked up and saw Huachong's blazing gaze was trained on a divine statue ahead of him. The statue was covered head to toe with a white veil, but the general shape of it could be made out. One section protruded sharply. It seemed to be pointing a sword. A patch of caustic red at the sharp tip of the sword's point was spread, staining, soaking the white silk veil. There was blood on the sword. Clearly there was something strange about this divine statue. Perhaps the original was no longer under the white silk and had been replaced with something else. Shilian leapt to his feet and stood at Huachong's side, pointing the sword Fengshen at the strange form. Huachong wore a dark expression. He gave a wave, and the white veil fell with the motion. Shilian's pupils shrunk. It was a divine statue of Shilian beneath the white veil, a god-pleasing crown prince statue. There was a sword in a hand and a flower in the other, a smile on its face, but there were traces of blood on that smile. The blood had come from the sword in his hand. A boy dangled there, pierced through. The boy had bandages covering his head and blood covering his body. It was Lang Ying.